Hey everyone, welcome to the E2 Effective Elders podcast. Visit us at e2elders.org and please share this good word with others.
Hey everybody, welcome back to E2, our podcast. How grateful we are for the opportunity through the generosity of CDF Capital to bring this information to you to be of help in the local church. Dr. Billy Strother over there at Central Christian Church of the Bible in Moberly, Missouri, joins us every month. He's a part of our E2 coaching bench. And Dr. Billy and I have the privilege of welcoming Jim Obold. And Jim is the President, CEO of Servant Solutions. Jim, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Well, we count it a privilege to be a partner with Servant Solutions. I know that you are making a big difference. And by the way, thank you for being our lead sponsor at Lead Well this next March.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that. I was there for my first time last year. Really enjoyed it, and it's a good use of our stewardship dollars here.
Thank you. Yeah, it means the world to us. Well, today, Jim is going to help Dr. Billy and I to have a conversation with you, the elders and leadership staff of the local church, to lean into this issue of pastor compensation. It's a very important topic. And for example, even before we get into Jim's talking points, Dr. Billy, in a nutshell, do we not read in the New Testament that it's important for the local church to take care of the pastor?
Well, there's really three explicit primary texts. One is from the words of Jesus, Luke 10:1-7, and it ends with the laborer is worthy of his wages. And then 1 Corinthians 9:6-14, that one, Paul, like Jesus did, quoted Deuteronomy 25:4. You shall not muzzle the ox while threshing. And he says that, well, gosh, if the Old Testament, if God's concerned about an ox eating correctly, well, then we should be concerned about our ox-sized preachers like myself being well fed. And then finally, 1 Timothy 5:17-18. And it's in there that Paul said, he literally quotes Jesus. In fact, he says, for the scripture, and he's quoting Luke 10, says, you shall not muzzle the ox while he is threshing. The labor is worthy of his wages. Now, in Matthew 10, there's also a parallel, and the word for wages there is a synonym. It's the Greek word trophe, from which you get our word trophy. Jesus says literally, a worker is worthy of the trophy, which means taking care of them. It's provision. It's the means of taking care of an army.
Good. Well, so we've got this strong biblical foundation on which to build a strategy, a philosophy of, and a practice for compensating appropriately those who are leading and serving in the local church. So, Jim, what are some considerations for a proper compensation of that pastor?
Yeah, I'll be referring to a booklet that we have on our website. It's called Compensation Planning for Ministers. And it's about just only 6 pages long. It's an easy read, but it has, some of the, and also I just want to mention that I'm also an ordained pastor. So I live this life as far as the tax considerations and, working with the Social Security Administration and the IRS. And so I had some learning to do after about 23 years in banking, and then the Lord called me into service. And so I live this life too. I just want you to know.
So it drove you out of the ministry and then into banking again? Is that what it was?
I always say the Lord saved me from banking as well.
There you go.
So I think the question is, what would persons carrying similar responsibilities in other vocations be paid? This is a professional position that requires advanced degrees. And so probably when I was an executive pastor at a church, I would look at my local school district, and I would kind of peg different positions in the church from lead pastor to associate pastors to admin personnel with similar positions in the school district. And the school district pretty much has it down as far as how they have government statistics on how to pay their staff according to where that locale is, the state, the taxing authority, all of that. And so it's a pretty good measuring stick. So I would say to teachers, to administrators, CEOs, maybe what counselors would also make, and other service providers. So we have a listing of salaries and compensation packages for those different positions in our booklet.
Okay. So then what about church employee or independent contractor? Is that an issue today?
It sure is, especially in smaller churches. I know some of the larger churches have this down. If you are a pastor, 99% of the time you should be a W-2 employee. You should not be getting a W or a 1099. And some say, well, they're only part-time, or especially rural churches or 1 to 2 pastor churches do this. But the law says if you expect that person to be there at a certain time on premises every week, then they should be considered a W-2 employee, and pastors are. And so there's a wide range there, but I would say that if you have a pastor, they should be a W-2 and make sure that happens.
Yeah. That would then impact this tax status, right, of a minister? Isn't that an issue, the tax status of a minister?
Yes, we call it a dual status, and that is that a minister is considered dual status in that the IRS considers them an employee, but the Social Security Administration considers them a self-employed individual. And the reason for that is that ministers have the opportunity to opt out of Social Security, and we can talk about that in a little bit, but really that's the reason why there's that differentiation there. But there's an impact where a lay employee in the church is obligated to pay half of their Social Security, and Social Security total is 15.3% of your salary. And the church is on the line for 7.65% of that. But for a minister, since they're considered self-employed, they carry what we say the full freight. They pay the full 15.3%. That's quite a hit for them. So what we encourage churches to do, because of that dynamic, is to allow what's called a SECA allowance. And that SECA is SECA, it's Self-Employment Compensation Act. And it just says that please supply that type of reimbursement for the pastor, so they're not deemed that double tax.
Can they do that, Jim, just on like a regular W-2? Or is there a form they have to file if they're doing that for a pastor, paying half the Social Security?
As far as it would be just an increase in pay is what it would be. Good. Then it would be reported on the W-2 as fully taxable. What's the dynamic there is that even though you get a SECA allowance, you still have to pay Social Security on your Social Security allowance. So there's still some inequity there, but it still helps the pastor that's not getting that allowance in the first place.
Yes. Why don't you go ahead and unpack opting out of Social Security while we're already on that topic?
I had this opportunity because I spent so much time in banking. I had 40 credits with Social Security, and so I was fully vested. So I could have saved 15.3% of my pay by opting out of Social Security. And that's where there's some forks in the road when it comes to decision making for pastors in that situation. A lot of them have a pastor that comes alongside, puts their arm around them and say, I have a way to save you some money. We don't pay very much. And this is a way to do this. But that should not be your only consideration. There is a theological basis for opting out of Social Security. And you have to sign what's called a 4361 IRS form. And what that says is that you are conscientiously opposed opposed to socialized insurance. And a lot of us don't even know what that means. I know I had to do some research to figure out what that was. And in my heart of hearts, I could not sign that document, even though it would have saved me money, even though I was vested for 40 credits. I could not do that. And I just left it up to the Lord to say, please bless this decision. But there's a lot that Social Security provides that is great. First of all, it provides a Medicare element. That is, a lot of people say that's the best insurance out there right now. It supplies disability insurance along with retirement. Kind of a forced retirement savings. So there's some, I guess, some chatter out there about Social Security not being around in 10 years, so forth. It will always be around. Don't let that scare tactic get to you, especially younger pastors. They said that's a reason to opt out. We'll either be taxed more or they'll be adjusted. Social Security was designed for those that live past their life expectancy. Well, our life expectancy, especially as men, is at 84, 85 right now, and Social Security just hasn't kept up with that life expectancy. And so that's why it's in trouble. I could probably fix Social Security in about 4 easy steps, but they won't let me, and neither will politicians. It's a political football right now, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense why it can't be fixed right now. But that's another topic for another day.
Yeah. Talk to us about housing allowance. That would be a consideration for compensation.
Yeah, this is a legislation that's been around over 100 years, and it was challenged pretty well several years ago in Wisconsin. Actually, a progressive judge considered it unconstitutional, and then the Treasury Department, the Beckett Foundation, the IRS all came to the side of churches and ministers in this case, and won that handily in the appellate court in Chicago. And the Freedom from Religion Foundation said, we will not bring this suit again. It cost us a lot of money, a lot of time, and we were soundly defeated. So those that think that we're in a more secularized society and that the housing allowance is on its deathbed, I don't believe that. I think that it's kind of survived this latest challenge, and it's safe for a long while, even though we're in this more secularized legal environment. So go ahead.
Now, Jim, do you have to be ordained then to get the housing allowance? And
you do. It's the law says you have to be credentialed, so that would. The way I identify credentialed is commissioned, licensed, or ordained.
Okay. So, I remember some churches getting in trouble in the 90s and the early aughts because they bring somebody on staff and say, well, everybody's ordained, everybody's independent contractor. But that's shady practice some churches have got involved in, correct?
Yes, and just because you're called a pastor at a church doesn't mean that you're commissioned, licensed, or ordained. I mean, you have to go through a process, and an individual church just to make sure that they go through that process.
And on that housing allowance, a couple of things there. Can you tell us, how does it have to be documented? Number one. Number two, how is it calculated? For example, can I just say, hey, I'm going to have a $75,000 housing allowance?
Yeah, we call that, you have to meet a three-way test as a minister that is working currently. And it's different in retirement with a church plan, and I'll explain that a little bit as well. But the three-way test, it's the lower of your actual expenses, your estimated expenses for that year, or your fair rental value plus utilities and rental value of your furniture, okay? And so usually that's the higher one, that last one. But then, so you're usually dealing with the lower of your estimate or your actual expenses for that year. And what's the best thing about housing allowances, it includes anything that has to do with the upkeep or the maintenance of your house, from mortgage to an umbrella policy to mower gas. All of those things that have to do with furnishing, decorating, maintaining your home can apply toward housing allowance. So as long as it meets that three-way test and you take the lower of that, then you're in good standing. Now, how to document that, Gary, is that you have to have that with your board of directors estimated before the year starts. And the reason why is they have to figure out from your payroll how much of that to preclude from taxes. So that's why it has to be done in November, December, somewhere documented in the minutes of the board to make sure that that happens for the next year.
And can that dollar amount be changed during a current calendar year?
It can, yes. If there's, let's say, a major expense like a roof repair, or you want to do some remodeling to a bathroom or something like that, it can be adjusted. Just make sure it's documented in the minutes again. And that from that point forward, let's say this happens in May, for the next 7 months, that can be adjusted to meet that final amount by December.
Is there a drop dead date during a current calendar year when that adjustment cannot happen? Let's say that that roof repair is going to be happening in the first week of October. And so this person is having an extra $15,000-$20,000 hit in October. Can that be changed that late in the year?
It can. I think the ceiling of that would be how much salary do they have left for that year, and how much of it is subject to tax that can be precluded through housing allowance. So that's the only ceiling of that and the time of that. You might be able to get most of it, but maybe not all of it.
So Jim, are there principles which you can, or products or places where loving elders can go to try to really find out, well, what is the remuneration package that we should be fairly offering?
Yeah, I think the resources on our website are gathered through the Church Benefits Association, which includes a lot of denominational plans, and we're not competing against each other. We're colleagues, and we share these resources. So, but on our website at servantsolutions.org, if you go under compensation planning, there's a plethora of information to, if you want to pay for a service to do that for a particular position or your staff. But I know whenever I was doing my executive pastor work, I would try to keep within a range of our budget of 45 to 55%. That would include all pay for all staff, including benefits. But for a particular position, there are some ways that you can base it on experience and those types of things, education, but also there's some limits on whether you're in rural West Virginia or you're in Chicago. There's some limitations there as far as just cost of living. And so we consider those things as well in the total remuneration package.
Speaking of remuneration, what happens if Dr. Billy takes somebody out for dinner? Let's say it's somebody who's going to want some discipleship done, or maybe it's an evangelistic kind of a dinner. Is that reimbursable, or he's going to the hospital and he's making a hospital call, or is the mileage reimbursable? How do you handle reimbursables?
Yeah, I think this is part of a broader conversation when it comes to there's two things that there's the cost of the minister versus the cost of ministry. And those are two distinct concepts. The worst words I can hear when it comes to a package is that we have $50,000 for you, Pastor. You can divide it up any way you want.
Any way you want to.
That is the worst thing you can do for that pastor. First of all, the church doesn't know really what they're paying that pastor after everything is done with professional expenses and such, and neither does the congregation. And so what we espouse is that the cost of ministry, it includes those costs related to the work of the minister and is properly a part of the local church expenses. And so it's incurred without regard to which minister is serving the congregation at a particular time. So that's cost of ministry, I'm sorry. And so those are auto expenses, continuing ed, convention, hospitality, a professional library, dues to professional organizations, church supplies, those types of things. You know, even I find that pastors get invited to a lot of graduation parties, and they have to provide gifts, and they are there representing the church more than anything. They may have some friendship ties, but really representing the church. And there should be some funds in the budget to help that pastor to represent the church well in those settings. But then there's the cost of the minister, and that relates to those that directly or indirectly related to compensating the particular pastor serving the church at that time. And it's just three things. It's the cash salary, the housing allowance, and any benefits that they want to offer that particular pastor. So
would you agree, Jim, that in the end, no matter what the numbers are, no matter how the package is put out there, would you agree that it's really about honor? You know, does the leadership honor the ministry of preaching and prayer and the word and shepherding in that sense? So therefore trying to keep financial burdens off their pastor to free him up to do ministry in Jesus' name. Would it be about honor and the word?
It would be. It would also, what we find, especially with younger pastors, that they typically only last 3 to 5 years after seminary, and they're leaving the ministry in droves because of financial considerations. And that's because maybe there's too much of an emphasis on the lead pastor's salary and not enough on associates and those of youth pastors and those that get ministry done on the ground and new ministries off the ground as well. And so there might be one eye on the lead pastor, but not another one on the rest of the staff, and that needs to be balanced out a little bit.
Yeah. You know, that phrase that you used a moment ago, that kind of sent a chill in our spines. Hey, we got $50,000 for you. You can use it however you want.
Oh boy.
One of the areas that we deal with, and that is, for example, at E2, when we're helping a church go through succession, many times a minister is unable to leave because he does not have sufficient funds to support him after no longer receiving a paycheck from that church, that there has not been sufficient gifting or remuneration for retirement. Can you talk a little bit, Jim, about retirement planning?
Yes, and that's kind of the world that I live in at Super Solutions. We are a church retirement plan, and as a minister, I see this all the time, is that the church hasn't stepped up either in a straight benefit or a match situation, or just I see some last second ditch efforts of here's 25,000 as you leave the door, and it's still not enough because that little bundle of money is not going to help them as we're living longer into retirement. We live about a quarter of our lives in retirement, and it's healthy for the church for that pastor to leave well. And that is that there's the reality of we have a call to ministry, but we don't have a call to paid ministry for the rest of our lives. We have a calling all our life, and it can be done in part-time work or volunteer work or interim work, those types of things. But I do see that because of faculties leaving us, it's just a reality of a sin-cursed world, and we have to acknowledge that as pastors, and as elder boards as well. That you know, in the 65 to 70 range, there should be proper planning as far as how to succeed well for the church. I also see a little bit of this with disabilities. If there's not proper disability insurance, I've seen churches and the pastor's family stuck in this little tug of war of, boy, we need the money, but we're not really providing the service. And then from the elders to the congregation, we don't want to kick the pastor to the curb, but we need to move on. And so if there were proper insurances in place as well to cover that scenario, that would help all parties involved.
What about vacation? PTO, personal time off, PTO. What about, you know, we help churches establish a sabbatical policy. We're working with elder teams to understand that word sabbatical. So what would you have to say about that, Jim?
Yeah, I think it should be documented and followed. I think it helps everybody understand what the culture is at the church, and but I think be generous in this area, especially for pastors. There's a certain spiritual load that they are carrying that is far more weighty past the business day. We all know that, even to the weekend and evenings. And so be generous in that. I know here.
Or on vacations.
Yeah.
Call back from vacations.
Yeah. And even if, don't let your pastor take a vacation to go on a missions trip,
Yeah, exactly.
Have them have this is totally unplugged time without any representation of any type of church service or anything like that. So I would say, after 5 years, at least have 5 weeks of vacation for your pastor.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Part-time, bivocational, anything there?
Yeah. Part-time pastors are there for a reason, and you need them part-time for a reason. But usually what I would say is that those kind of positions demand a little bit more per hour or a little bit higher pay because of that. They usually are bringing very much of a specialty in their line of work and ministry, and it's okay to pay them a little bit more when you're in relation to full-time work. And so that's kind of all I kind of wanted to say on that regard. But bivocational as well, the churches get lulled to sleep a little bit, especially smaller churches that use bivocational pastors, in that the bivocational pastor is very, very much dependent on their secular work versus their ministry income. And then the church gets lulled that their budget adjusts to that, to not paying. And then when that pastor finally leaves, then they have to go and get a pastor that demands 3 times.
It's whiplash at that point.
So I always encourage a church to always, if they're not paying that pastor and that the church is able to pay that pastor less, save for the future, like they're paying a full-time pastor.
Would you say that kind of in the end that you're all saying our churches are trying to reach our community, but how you compensate the pastor and family is a big pronouncement to the community. I mean, if you won't take care of your own pastor, his wife and 3 little kids, well, why would anybody in the community think you're going to take care of them?
Yes, very well said. I couldn't say it better.
When I listen to your recommendations about compensation, when I think about Dr. Billy's texts from both New and Old Testament, in my mind, I think of, God is outrageously generous. He loved us so much that he gave his one and only son. He's outrageously generous. I have been made in his image. Therefore, I should be outrageously generous. Doesn't mean that I'm going to have an unlimited amount of money in the budget for the pastor, for the staff, but we cannot have this mentality of keeping them barefoot and poor. That mentality is not God-honoring in any way, shape, or form. God will not bless that local church when that is the driving value of the leadership team. His blessing will not be on that congregation. So I do believe that for those who are listening to this podcast on pastoral compensation, we have to remember there is a spiritual component to this. It's not just about dollars and cents in a budget. It's about spiritual truth in the Bible. And when we honor, just as Dr. Billy pointed out, when we honor those who are feeding us, serving us, leading us, teaching us, mentoring us, when we honor their efforts, God is pleased. I believe that it's very important that we make decisions at a budgetary place as a reflection of the Word of God. As elders, We are shepherds of the flock, and we need to always anchor our practices in biblical truth. Yeah.
Absolutely. Amen.
You know, even the Old Testament, the tribe of Levi, they weren't out caring for their sheep and their flocks, and they weren't planting crops. God said very clearly in the Old Testament, I am your inheritance. I'm going to take care of you. And the people were to bring those sacrifices, and the Levites, as they offered the sacrifices, they were allowed to eat something. They had food. And I believe that there's a reflection that when those men and women are sacrificing their vocational life for the purpose of serving the local church, that those who are benefiting from their care and their ministry, we should bring gifts in appreciation to that. Yeah.
And just to add that it's very difficult. This impetus is really on the church board and leadership. It's not. I think a lot of pastors they get weighed down by the call, and it's hard for them to advocate for their own compensation, to be treated fairly. So what I tell our pastors that we serve is that we can step in as a third party if you wish. I know it's very difficult for you to ask for something because it may seem self-serving, but it really isn't. It's serving the church, it's serving the community, it's serving their families. And we'd much rather have you here than to leave our church. And so we can, all three of us here on this call, we have resources, and actually meet with boards to help them get down the road here from those that know this subject well.
You know, what you just said is very important. We all have some resources. So for those who've got questions for Jim, Jim, if I recall, your email is JOBOLD, so Jim Obold, take that apostrophe out, at servantsolutions.org, right?
Correct.
Yep. And remember what Jim just made mention of, they've got all of this great information at servantsolutions.org that you would want to go to that website. Dr. Billy, obviously, he is a walking New Testament, and he can bring all kinds of spiritual understanding that's foundational for this. And at E2, it's our privilege and opportunity to help you, the elder team, to form and fashion a right practice, a right core value system in this regard.
Absolutely. Hey, let's, before we're done, can we put Jim to the test here? Jim, I have a 40-acre farm. I'm a full-time professor and preacher. My tractor is a 1949 8N on its last leg. So if I buy a new tractor, can I take that as a housing allowance deduction?
Well, it would, if it's to the maintenance of your home. And so I don't know if the farm would be related to the home itself, but unless you're farming your front yard.
My wife makes me live out in the barn sometimes when I make her angry. So
put a mower attachment. Put a mower attachment on that.
Brush hog.
It now becomes a lawnmower. There you go. You know, we're so appreciative, Jim, for your time, and this means a lot to all of us. And I know that we want to be honorable people of God, while you know, keeping people with us. You made mention a moment ago in conversation about the hiring crisis. And I know that you didn't use that term, but there is a hiring crisis. And if people are not adequately compensated, they're going to go to where they can earn a livable wage in order to provide food for their family, a place to live.
And
so
this is loan debt.
And to repay student loan debt. Absolutely.
Oh, it may sound terrible, but my first church, you know, as a young seminary professor, 2 kids showed up unplanned, and 4 years later, the church has really grown, and I'm still making the same amount every week. And another church comes along and says, "Hey, you want to be our preacher?" I said, No, I'm happy where I'm at. And then they said, "Well, we'll double your salary." I said, "I feel the call of Jesus." All comes
Yes,
in
you were
many different avenues. Yes.
Yes. There you go. Well, brothers, thank you so very much. Hope
Thank
that you have
you.
a great rest of the day, and I'm confident that we will be in touch.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Mhm.